They said it was over. That the case was closed. That the man was guilty beyond doubt. But 5 years later, in the blistering heat of the Arizona desert, a retired K9 dog named Shadow began digging, and what he pulled from the ground didn't just rewrite a murder case. It saved his handler's life, just minutes before a lethal injection. Right finger. This is the story of unshakable loyalty, lost evidence, and a dog who knew the truth, even when the entire world turned away. Welcome to Heroic Animals, where the heroes don't always wear badges or speak our language. Sometimes they bark, dig, and wait until the moment truly matters. If you believe animals aren't just companions but protectors, guardians, and the bravest witnesses in silence, you're in the right place. Right finger. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on notifications, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Dogface, because the next untold story might just come from a four-legged friend. The courtroom was silent, not the kind of silence that follows justice. This one was heavy, like wet concrete, like guilt that didn't quite fit right. Daniel Reyes, former Border Patrol officer, sat motionless as the judge read the sentence. By the power vested in this court, and by unanimous jury decision, we hereby sentence you to death for the murder of Officer Brent Waller. Gasps echoed in the chamber. But Daniel didn't move. His eyes weren't on the judge, or the jury, or even the weeping mother of the man he was accused of killing. He was staring at the only one who still believed him. Shadow, a large black German Shepherd K9, sitting just outside the defendant's box, muzzle graying with age, tail still, eyes locked on Daniel, unwavering. As the guards cuffed him and led him away, Shadow let out a low whimper, barely audible, but enough to stop Daniel mid-step. He turned his head slightly and whispered, "I didn't do it, boy, you know that." Shadow's ears perked, but that was the last time they saw each other. 3 months later, Shadow was officially retired from duty. The department couldn't risk keeping a K9 emotionally attached to a convicted killer. He was reassigned to a training facility. They said he was too old for field work anyway. But Shadow didn't adjust. He stopped eating regularly, refused to bond with new handlers, spent his nights pacing by the fences, staring out at the horizon, as if waiting for something, for someone. Daniel lived each day in isolation. He had pleaded not guilty from the start. There had been no fingerprints on the weapon, no DNA, just circumstantial evidence and one damning testimony from a fellow officer, claiming he'd seen Daniel flee the scene. But Daniel knew the truth. So did Shadow. Brent Waller wasn't just his partner. He was Daniel's friend. They'd patrolled the desert together for 2 years. Shadow was their joint K9, trained to track, defend, detect. The night Brent died, everything had gone wrong. They had followed a tip about a cartel drop along a desolate ridge in Arizona. Only Brent had gone in first, too eager, too fast. Minutes later, Daniel found him lying in the dust, shot twice. The backup took too long. The weapon was never recovered. And within days, the narrative flipped. Daniel had been accused of betrayal, greed, murder. Shadow had been there too. But no one asked what he saw. Years passed. Daniel's appeals failed. His execution was scheduled, May 19, 11 a.m. As the date approached, the media resurfaced the case. The cop who killed his partner. Justice for Waller. But no one talked about the inconsistencies. No one mentioned that the GPS logs from their body cams had gone missing. Or that the only physical witness, Shadow, had been retired quietly without assessment. Until one evening, 5 years to the day since the shooting, Shadow slipped through the fence of the training facility and vanished. They searched for hours, days, nothing. Then, 3 days later, a hiker in the Arizona desert spotted something strange near an old ridge, a black dog furiously digging into the sand, barking like his life depended on it. He called it in. When rangers arrived, Shadow was still digging, and what they found buried beneath his paws would reopen a case everyone thought was closed. The ranger knelt beside the hole, hand over his radio, eyes narrowed. "This dog's not just digging," he murmured. "He's showing us something." Shadow's paws were caked in red sand. His tongue lolled out in exhaustion, but he refused to stop. Every scratch, every push of dirt, sent more dust flying from the pit. Then, with a sudden metallic clink, the ranger's spade struck something solid. "Whoa," That's not rock. He cleared more dirt. A corner of metal appeared, just barely visible, but unmistakable. A rusted lockbox, no bigger than a shoebox, half eaten by time and sand. The ranger called it in. Within hours, federal agents arrived and sealed off the area. Shadow was taken to the nearest vet clinic for dehydration and exhaustion. But not before he growled protectively when someone tried to remove the box from the dirt. He didn't want to leave it. He knew it mattered. Yellow square at the forensics lab. They pried open the box carefully. Cameras rolling. Inside, wrapped in 2 layers of old fabric and sealed plastic, were 2 objects. A Glock 19 handgun, corroded but intact. A small, battered flash drive. Everyone in the room held their breath. Serial number on the Glock? Matched the department-issued sidearm of Brent Waller, the murder weapon that had allegedly vanished after the crime. Gunshot residue tests confirmed it had been fired, twice. Exactly like the report described. But the real surprise came when the forensic tech opened the flash drive. Yellow square, the lost data. It contained archived GPS logs and backup video files, clearly copied from a bodycam system. Someone had exported the files right before the night of the murder. One of the videos was grainy, but clear enough. It showed Brent Waller approaching a group of silhouettes near the ridge. Smugglers, armed. One of them lunged. Gunfire erupted. Brent fired once, missed. Then someone else fired, twice. Brent went down. In the background, the attacker dropped the Glock and ran. Seconds later, Daniel's voice shouted from off-screen. The camera cut out. There was no footage of Daniel shooting. No sign he'd even held a weapon. The gun found buried had Daniel's fingerprints, but only on the exterior of the box. Not on the trigger. Not on the magazine. They'd buried the weapon to frame him. And the flash drive? Time-stamped just hours before Brent's death. Meaning someone in the department knew about the footage, and erased it from official servers. Someone had gone to the ridge and buried both pieces of evidence. But they didn't count on Shadow remembering where. Yellow square, meanwhile. At the prison, Daniel sat in his cell, staring at the wall. He had stopped counting days. Until that moment, when a guard rushed to his door. Face pale, voice shaking. "Reyes," he said, "they're halting the execution." Daniel blinked. "What? You're getting a hearing. New evidence. And you're not gonna believe who brought it." Daniel's hands trembled as the handcuffs were removed. He stood in the courtroom again, but this time, he wasn't the condemned. This was an emergency evidentiary hearing, called less than 18 hours before his scheduled execution. Outside, reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Inside, the judge wore the same black robe as 5 years ago, but his eyes carried the weight of regret. On the bench in front of Daniel lay a corroded Glock, a flash drive, and a new forensic report. But Daniel's eyes weren't on any of that. They were on the black furred figure resting beside the front row, Shadow. Now older, stiffer, but still watching him, ears high. Posture proud, loyal, unyielding. Yellow square, the prosecutor's voice cracked. This is absurd," she protested. "The evidence was buried. The chain of custody. It was buried." The judge cut in, because someone intended for it never to be found. But a dog did what no man bothered to, he remembered. And he led us straight to it. She went silent. The court played the recovered footage. The gallery leaned forward. Grainy as it was, it clearly showed Brent Waller being attacked by someone else. And in the background, faint but visible, was another silhouette, watching the ambush, not intervening. The room froze as the video paused on a single frame. It was Officer Jack Ellison, Brent's former training officer, now a senior figure in the narcotics division. He was the one who testified Daniel had fled the scene, that he saw Daniel standing over the body. But he wasn't at the scene to help. He was there before the shooting even happened. Yellow square, the betrayal revealed. The prosecution tried to delay, but the judge ordered an immediate subpoena. When Ellison was brought in for questioning, his confident swagger crumbled the moment the flash drive was placed on the table. He asked for a lawyer, but it was too late. Under pressure, he confessed to working with a cartel informant, in exchange for off-the-books payoffs and protection. Brent had started suspecting something, so Ellison lured him to the ridge that night, but didn't expect Daniel to follow. To cover his tracks, Ellison buried the gun and drive. He thought no one saw. But one did. Shadow. Yellow square in the final moments of the hearing. The judge's voice was stern, but clear. Daniel Reyes, this court overturns your conviction, vacates your sentence, and orders your immediate release. You are a free man. The room erupted. Daniel stood motionless for a second, unable to process the words. Then his eyes met Shadow's and the dog rose, limping, tail wagging once, then again, faster. Daniel knelt, arms open. Shadow leaned in, pressing his head into Daniel's chest like no time had passed. There were tears in Daniel's eyes. But not sadness. Gratitude. Yellow square press conference outside. A reporter raised their mic toward Daniel. What do you have to say about the fact that a dog saved your life? Daniel smiled through a cracked voice. He didn't just save my life, he waited 5 years to finish the job we started. Shadow didn't forget, and he didn't stop. That's not just loyalty, that's justice. And beside him, Shadow sat tall, because even without words, the world had finally listened. Freedom didn't feel like freedom, not at first. The world had moved on while Daniel Reyes sat behind bars. Stores he once visited were closed. Friends had moved away. His own apartment was long gone. But none of that mattered as much as the cold fact that his partner had died. His name had been dragged through every headline, and no one had stood beside him. Except one. Shadow. Now older. His muzzle nearly all gray. Shadow stayed at Daniel's side like a shadow in the truest sense. When Daniel walked, he followed. When Daniel paused, he sat. When Daniel couldn't sleep, Shadow would rest his head across Daniel's feet, like he'd waited years for this moment. Daniel didn't speak much to reporters. He didn't want the book deals or the interviews. He wanted answers. And Shadow still had one more to give. Yellow square 1 week after his release. Daniel took Shadow for a walk, their first real walk in years. Out in the open desert, where patrol routes used to lead them together. As they passed the old training ridge, Shadow hesitated, then turned slightly off the trail. He looked back at Daniel, then trotted ahead. Again? Daniel asked, heart thudding. Shadow began sniffing the dry ground intensely, circling a patch near a large mesquite bush. Then, out of nowhere, he sat, ears high, eyes fixed. Daniel's breath caught. He dropped to his knees and began to dig. Only a few inches below, he found it, a strip of tightly bound cloth. And inside it, a micro SD card. Yellow square what they never expected. Back at home, Daniel inserted the card into his laptop. There was only one file, an audio recording. It was dated 1 day before Brent's death. Daniel hit play. Ellison's voice came through, grainy, but clear. Don't worry about Reyes. I'll handle him if he starts asking questions. Waller's already too close. After tomorrow night, there won't be anyone sniffing around, except that damn dog. Silence. Then another voice, unfamiliar. You sure about this? K9s are harder to fool than agents. That mutt's loyal, but he can't talk. Daniel stared at the screen. Numb. They had planned the entire ambush. And they knew Shadow was the only one who might figure it out. That's why they tried to bury it all. But Shadow had remembered both locations, the box, and this recording. He hadn't just cleared Daniel's name. He had found every missing piece, and waited until Daniel was free to hand it over. Yellow square national attention. The second recording hit the news like a bombshell. Now there was not only proof of Daniel's innocence, but evidence of systemic corruption in the Border Patrol unit. Ellison's assets were frozen. His internal contacts began to fall like dominoes. The Department of Justice launched a task force into Waller's unit, and the case became a national reckoning. But in all the noise, one name kept resurfacing. Shadow. Not as a dog, but as a witness. Yellow square and back at home. Daniel knelt beside Shadow that night, brushing his thick fur slowly. You kept everything, he whispered. All this time, you were carrying the weight for both of us. Shadow didn't move, just rested his head against Daniel's chest, breathing slow and steady, the way he always had, the way no one else ever did. The hall stood in silence, a silence filled not with grief, but reverence. On the stage, beneath the soft light of the American flag and the blue banner of the K9 Valor Unit, Shadow stood with his chest high and his nose pointed forward, wearing a newly minted medal around his collar. The crowd rose to their feet. Agents, veterans, prosecutors, even children, all applauding not a human, but a dog, a black German shepherd who had waited 5 years to dig up the truth. Who had remembered what humans forgot? Who had believed when no one else did? Daniel stood beside him in formal attire, his hand resting gently on Shadow's back. The Secretary of Homeland Security leaned into the mic. "We have given this award to officers, to agents, to fallen heroes, but never before, to a dog who did what even trained men could not." The medal read, "For relentless loyalty in the face of silence, Agent Shadow." The room echoed with claps. But Daniel's smile was tight, because he could feel Shadow trembling slightly. Not from fear, from age. Yellow square. The signs began soon after. Shadow stopped finishing his meals. Some days, he struggled to climb into the truck without Daniel lifting him gently. At night, his breathing grew shallow. He no longer barked at passing cars. He just watched. The vet gave it to him straight. "He's old, Daniel. He's done more than any dog should ever have to do. But his body, it's fading. Kidneys, hips, and the stress over the years, it's taken its toll." Daniel nodded, but inside, he wanted to scream. Shadow had survived everything: gunfire, betrayal, heat, hunger, heartbreak. Now he was losing to time. Yellow square. The last mission. 1 week later, Daniel received an envelope in the mail. It wasn't from a friend. It was from the DOJ. Inside was a request. Would Shadow be willing to participate in a final training video, a tribute to canine memory and instinct? They wanted to capture his story. Daniel read it aloud to Shadow. The dog wagged his tail. Once. Permission granted. Yellow square. On set, with cameras rolling, they filmed Shadow moving through mock patrol courses, sniffing old uniforms, walking slowly but surely through a recreated desert ridge. At one point, Daniel knelt beside him for a staged interview. The camera rolled. "What does Shadow mean to you?" the producer asked. Daniel looked at his partner, then answered, simply, "He didn't just save my life. He carried it. Every day I couldn't speak. He waited. Every truth I couldn't prove, he held on to. And when no one else remembered me, he never forgot." Tears welled up behind the lens. Even the director had to turn away. Yellow square. That night, back home, Shadow curled up beside the fireplace, head resting on his front paws. Daniel lay on the rug next to him, hand on his chest. No leash, no commands, just warmth, and silence, and the unspoken bond between two souls who had been through war together, not overseas, but right here, at home. Daniel whispered, "You did good, buddy. You did more than any of us deserved." Shadow closed his eyes slowly, and breathed, steady, still listening, always listening. The fire crackled low in the hearth, painting warm orange shadows across the living room walls. Shadow lay curled on the soft rug, chest rising and falling with shallow rhythm. Daniel sat beside him, a thick blanket wrapped over his shoulders, as if he could shield the dog from the inevitable just by staying close enough. Outside, the world moved on. Traffic lights blinked, news anchors read headlines, politicians argued on screen. But inside that little house, time stood still. And at 2:12 a.m., without a sound, Shadow took his final breath. Daniel didn't cry right away. He just sat there, hand still resting on the soft patch behind Shadow's ears, as if part of him thought, maybe, the dog would lift his head one last time, wag that tired tail, and insist they had one more case to solve. But Shadow didn't move, and for the first time in 5 years, Daniel felt alone. Yellow square. The nation mourned. News broke the next morning. K9 hero Shadow passes away. Dog who saved innocent man from death row remembered as national icon. Tributes poured in from around the world. Veterans wrote letters. Officers from all 50 states sent their badges with black mourning bands. One young girl, age 9, sent a drawing. A big black dog with wings, standing guard at heaven's gates. Daniel couldn't bring himself to speak to reporters, but he allowed one photo of Shadow lying peacefully, medal still resting beside him. Under the image, the headline read, "He waited, he remembered, he delivered justice." Yellow square. 1 month later, a bronze statue was unveiled in Washington, D.C. It stood outside the National Law Enforcement Museum, not among the human officers, but in a space newly dedicated to animal service. The statue showed Shadow mid-stride, ears forward, nose down, digging. Below it, carved in steel, K9 Agent Shadow, 2009 to 2024. Buried the truth once, dug it up to save a life. Carried what no human could. Asterisk. Children left flowers there, some left chew toys. And every so often, Daniel would visit, not in uniform. Not with speeches, just with quiet steps. A pat on the statue's head. And a whisper. Still with me, partner. Yellow square. But Shadow's legacy didn't stop there. Because of his case, the DOJ enacted the Shadow Protocol, a nationwide policy requiring all K9 cam and handler data to be dual archived. A dedicated review of retired K9 units tied to unresolved cases. Official recognition of animals as admissible witnesses in court when supported by forensic behavior data. The law was controversial, but it passed, because one dog had waited 5 years, with a memory stronger than the system meant to erase it. Green square. And somewhere, under that Arizona sun, Daniel stood on the ridge where it all began. He brought no flowers, just one item, Shadow's collar. He buried it gently beneath the same mesquite tree Shadow had once dug beside. No box. No markers, just earth, dust, and memory. As the wind kicked up around him, Daniel closed his eyes. I lived because you refused to forget, he said quietly. Now I'll spend the rest of my life making sure no one forgets you. And with that, he walked away. But the paw prints? They would never fade. 1 month after Shadow's passing, a letter arrived at Daniel's doorstep. It wasn't from a lawyer. Not a politician. Not a news station asking for a book deal. It was handwritten, in purple ink, on lined notebook paper. Dear Mr. Reyes, my name is Lucy. I'm 10. I saw your dog on the news. I cried. He's why I want to grow up and be a K9 handler. Not a princess. Not a movie star. Just someone a dog can trust like that. I drew this for you. Inside the envelope was a crayon sketch. Daniel in uniform, standing next to Shadow, both under a big blue sky with the words, "Justice is loyal." Daniel held the picture for a long time, then put it on the fridge. Yellow square. In another part of the country, Officer Marcus Liang sat in his patrol car, staring at a cold case file that had haunted him for years. A missing child. Evidence that never added up. And a K9 named Bear. Retired after the investigation turned up nothing. But Shadow's story had made national headlines, and Liang hadn't stopped thinking about it since. The detail that hit him hardest? Shadow had tried to signal. Had acted out. Had returned to the same place over and over. Just like Bear had. But no one listened back then. Now Liang reopened the case. And 3 days later, Bear, though arthritic and slow, led them to an abandoned irrigation pipe 2 miles from the original search grid. Inside were the remains of the missing child. And the first clue that would eventually crack a child trafficking ring wide open. All because another dog remembered. Yellow square. Across the country, change spread. The Shadow Protocol didn't just change policy. It changed perspective. For the first time, dogs were reviewed not just as tools, but witnesses. Retired K9s across the nation were re-evaluated. Their logs reanalyzed. Cases once deemed dead ends were given new breath, and in multiple states. New arrests followed. One FBI analyst put it simply in a press conference. Shadow didn't just solve a case. He taught us we stopped asking the right questions the day we stopped listening to what couldn't speak. Yellow square. And Daniel? He didn't return to the force. He didn't write a book or go on TV. Instead, he did something smaller, something truer. He opened a small training center in Arizona, Shadow Ridge K9 Academy. It trained both dogs and humans, not just in obedience or detection, but in partnership. Every child who walked through those doors learned one simple rule. A dog won't lie to you. So you better be the kind of human who never lies back. And hanging on the main wall, framed behind glass, was the old K9 vest. The name still embroidered on the front. Shadow. The desert was quiet that morning. No wind, no sirens. Just the gentle hum of heat rising off the ground and the distant call of a hawk tracing circles in the sky. Daniel knelt beneath the old mesquite tree, the same spot where Shadow had once dug with frantic urgency. Where secrets had been unearthed. Where justice had clawed its way back from the grave. In his hands, Daniel held a small wooden box. Inside was Shadow's badge, a folded photo of them in uniform, and a single metal tag that read, K9 Agent Shadow, loyalty never left. He buried the box deep in the same earth that once tried to swallow the truth. Then he sat there for a long time. Not crying, just remembering. Yellow Square, a man alone, but never lonely. The academy was running strong. Kids came from all over to learn. Retired dogs found second lives as protectors, comfort animals, and companions. Shadow's name had become legend, not just in law enforcement, but in classrooms, documentaries, even comic books. But none of that mattered to Daniel. What mattered was that one life had been saved. His. And that every bark, every dig, every silent stare from that dog had never been in vain. Yellow Square. Before leaving the ridge, Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tin whistle. It had belonged to Brent Waller, Shadow's first handler, the one whose death had started everything. Daniel placed the whistle beneath a stone at the base of the tree. Now you're both here, he whispered, then stood. He looked out across the horizon, the same stretch of desert that once hid a lie, now holding a truth no one would ever bury again. Green Square. Final narration. They say memory fades. That time wears down even the sharpest edges of pain. But Shadow never forgot. Not the place, not the moment, not the man he refused to abandon. And because of him, the truth clawed its way out of the ground, gasping for air, and lived. This was the story of a K9 who waited 5 years in silence, to speak louder than any courtroom ever could. One spring morning, Daniel heard a knock on the gate of Shadow Ridge K9 Academy. It was a teenage girl, maybe 15, in a faded t-shirt and cargo pants too big for her frame. She held a leash nervously in one hand. At the other end of it, a young German shepherd pup. No older than 6 months. Ears too big for his head. Eyes wide and cautious. His name's Echo, she said softly. He's not like the others. They say he's untrainable. But I saw your video, the one about Shadow, and I thought maybe. She trailed off. Daniel knelt slowly, letting Echo sniff his hand. The dog didn't wag, but he didn't pull away either. And in those dark eyes, Daniel saw something familiar. Watchfulness, doubt, intelligence, and a longing to belong. Yellow Square. 1 year later, Echo was no longer the awkward pup people had given up on. Under Daniel's guidance and the quiet, unseen presence of Shadow's legend, the young dog had become the academy's most promising trainee. He could track like a bloodhound, detect subtle behavioral shifts in kids with trauma, and, eerily, he had one habit no one taught him. Every night, just before sunset, Echo would trot out to the far end of the training field, where a lone tree stood silhouetted against the horizon. The mesquite tree. He would sit there for exactly 2 minutes, then trot back in, head held high, as if paying tribute. Yellow Square. 1 mission, 2 lives, endless echoes. The DOJ later returned to Daniel with a request. Would Echo serve as a legacy K9? Continuing what Shadow started. Daniel said yes, but on one condition. Let him be trained to listen, not just obey. Let him remember that sometimes silence is smarter than command. And above all, don't make him forget the ones who came before. Green Square. Final reflection. Some stories end, but the ones that matter most, echo. In the scratch of paws on dry earth. In the quiet stare that sees past the badge. In the pup who waits each day by a tree, for someone who isn't coming back. Shadow may be gone, but Echo remembers. And somewhere out there, another truth is waiting to be dug up. Years have passed. The academy still stands beneath the Arizona sky, its training fields golden under the morning sun. Children still come to learn trust. Retired K9s still come to find purpose. And every graduate, whether human or canine, leaves with one story etched into their memory. The story of Shadow. His collar now rests inside a glass case near the front door of the main hall, next to a faded photo of a younger Daniel Reyes and a dog whose gaze seemed to pierce through lies. Visitors often stop to read the plaque below. He didn't bark for attention. He barked for the truth. In memory of K9 Agent Shadow. And beyond the academy walls, his story continues to ripple through laws passed, lives saved, and the way people now pause to wonder, what is that dog really trying to say? Yellow Square. But for Daniel, the legacy is personal. Every evening, just before the sun dips behind the ridge, Daniel takes a quiet walk. Sometimes alone, sometimes with Echo, but always with a memory at his side. At the edge of the property, beneath the old mesquite tree, he stands in silence. No speeches, no ceremonies, just the soft whistle of desert wind through the leaves. Sometimes he speaks, sometimes he just listens. Because some bonds don't need words. Some stories don't need endings. And some heroes never needed to speak to be heard. Green Square, a letter Daniel once wrote, but never sent. To whoever finds themselves lost, doubted, or alone. Remember. One dog waited 5 years in silence just to save one life. He didn't know how long it would take, or if anyone would ever listen. But he remembered. Every day. He never gave up. So if today you feel unheard, unseen, forgotten, just hold on. Someone's listening. Somewhere. Something good still remembers you. I know. Because Shadow remembered me. If Shadow's story touched your heart, help us share the message of these silent heroes. Subscribe to Heroic Animals so you never miss a true, emotional, and deeply human story like this. Mailbox, turn on notifications to be the first to witness the next journey. Speech balloon, leave a comment below. Have you ever seen a dog do something beyond your imagination? Or, if you were Daniel, what would you say to Shadow in that final moment? Movie camera at Heroic Animals. Every story isn't just a video. It's a reminder. Sometimes, the most righteous acts come from those the world overlooks. See you on the next journey. Because the next hero may be waiting silently in the dark, just hoping someone will listen. Black heart for Shadow. Forever. Paw.